high priest was able to offer. He offered his one and only life as a sacrifice for sin. And only through Jesus, our high priest, can we have access to God the Father. And, as our messenger, directly sent from God, Jesus is the messenger, the apostle that we need to listen to. Now, before I continue with this chapter and reading it, I want to ask you two questions that I believe come right directly from those two terms, because they're there for a reason. And the first question relates to that high priest. In your efforts to connect with your Creator God, 98% of people on planet Earth believe in a God. In your efforts to connect with your Creator God, do you attempt to connect with Him through Jesus? In other words, is Jesus your high priest? Number two, is Jesus the one that you seek to listen to for guidance in your daily life? In other words, is He your apostle? Verse 1, Jesus is the high priest and apostle. And if He's not your high priest and apostle, my encouragement is that you would make Him so. Invite Him to be so today. We're going to take the next few verses, the next 5 verses, in fact, as a unit, because the writer begins to set up a comparison, starting with verse 2, between Jesus and someone else that's noteworthy in history, a man named Moses. Hebrews 3, verse 2. He, that is Jesus, was faithful to the one who appointed him, just as Moses was faithful in all God's house. Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses, just as the builder of a house has greater honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, testifying to what would be said in the future. But Christ is faithful as a son over God's house. And we are His house. We are His house if we hold on to our courage and the hope of which we boast. So from this section, we learn that Jesus and Moses have at least two things in common. Both of them were given a mission. Both of them were appointed, it says. And second, both of them were faithful to the mission that God the Father gave them. Now, given that the original recipients were Jewish, I think that starting with a comparison with Moses was probably a good thing. I think that would have got their attention. Because no one else in history was more of a hero to the Jewish people then and even today than Moses. Even greater than David, greater than anyone in the Jewish context is Moses. Moses had a direct encounter with God at the burning bush. Moses was the one who was courageous and went before Pharaoh in Egypt and pled for the people to be free. And he led them safely through the wilderness to the edge of the promised land. Moses is the one who was the prophet who received the 10 Commandments from God on Mount Sinai. And Moses, in fact, wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. No one was worthy of greater honor than Moses to the Jewish people. But if you followed along while I was reading, you probably noticed that some of the statements made here might be a little controversial to the audience. In fact, some of them may have been downright offensive. For instance, when the writer says that while Moses was faithful as a servant, Jesus was faithful as son. And while Moses was faithful in God's house, Jesus was faithful over God's house. And then this summary sentence must have been the most offensive of all. Verse 3. Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses. Alright, so the writer is basically saying, as great as Moses was, and I don't think the writer is downplaying the significance of Moses. I don't think the writer is saying, okay, now that you're Christians, you got to get this Moses guy out of your minds. I think what he's saying is this, that as great as Moses was and is, Jesus is greater. In fact, Jesus is off the charts, because there is no one else in history who had the unique qualifications that he had. God the Father sent Moses to lead Israel out of their bondage to Pharaoh to the edge of the promised land. God the Father sent Jesus to earth to lead all people out of their bondage to death, to the devil, to hell, and to sin, to paradise, to eternal life, and to the eternal rest that God had for them.